When the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020, we were already in the middle of a climate crisis. When I put on my mask that summer, I was aware I wasn't just using it to protect from the virus, but also to protect from the smoke coming from BC's climate-related forest fires. So way back then, I started asking, is there a relationship between pandemics like COVID-19 and climate change? And if so, what is that relationship?
I came up with at least 5 different ways that these crises interact. So we're going to talk about each of these ways. So let's start with number 1, climate change and the emergence of new diseases. So it's widely known among scientists that climatic conditions will act as threat multipliers to a wide range of non-communicable, but also infectious diseases, from temperature-related deaths, from asthma and allergy conditions, water-related diseases like cholera, as well as mental health and stress-related illnesses. So scientists widely agree that there is a link between climate change conditions and risks of multiple types of disease. But what we are interested in at this moment in this class is new infectious disease like COVID-19. Daniel Brooks writes, "The planet is a minefield of pathogens with the potential to infect susceptible hosts, needing only the opportunity for contact. Climate change has always been the major catalyst for such opportunities." And to understand how climate change creates these opportunities, we need to learn about zoonotic viruses. So zoonotic diseases are those that can leap from a non-human animal to a human. What are some examples that we're all familiar with? The plague is spread to humans by fleas on rodents. And we know the plague is infamous for killing millions of people in Europe during the Middle Ages. Salmonella is another zoonotic virus. It's a bacteria found in fish. People get anthrax from infected animals or contaminated animal products like raw meat. Rabies can spread to people if they're bitten by an animal who has rabies, like a bat or a raccoon, also dogs in some countries. And HIV/AIDS was passed to humans from primates, probably through exposure to primate blood through hunting or butchering. Scientists estimate that 6 of 10 known infectious diseases in humans can be spread from animals, and 3 out of every 4 new or emerging infectious diseases in people come from animals. That's 75% of new or emerging infectious diseases come from animals. This is a really significant thing we're talking about. Viruses can become more severe when they enter a new host. And this is because a new host hasn't had time to build up resistance, unlike the previous host. And even as humans come up with vaccines, which we do, and build antibodies, which we do, zoonotic viruses can continue to hide in animals. And this means they can't be totally or permanently eliminated. And they can keep being reintroduced to humans through zoonosis. And one place these viruses hide is in reservoir hosts. Reservoir hosts are creatures like bats or birds that carry the pathogen, but they themselves actually experience very little illness or almost no illness. Some viruses require what's called an amplifier host, meaning a carrier that's an intermediate link between the reservoir host and another animal, such as mosquitoes, ticks, horses, or pigs. On the other hand, non-zoonotic viruses like smallpox and polioviruses are not zoonotic, so they can only infect humans. So therefore, we can make vaccines to permanently eliminate them because these viruses have nowhere else to hide. They can't hide in animals and change their form. So there are more opportunities for zoonosis when there is more contact between humans and animals. My question for you is, what human activities related to climate change increase contact between humans and animals. Try to come up with a list of maybe 3 activities. Okay, so I will share with you the 4 ones that come up in the literature the most. So the first is the globalization of travel and trade. So as we increase the movement of people, the movement of animals, and the movement of goods between regions and between countries, the diseases they carry also go along with them, as well as the emission of a lot of greenhouse gases through ships. The second is human population growth and the growth of mega cities. So as we expand our cities and fill them up with masses of people, we're taking over animal habitat, and humans are living closer to the border of where wild animals are. Third, deforestation, forest degradation, land clearing, and intensive farming practices cause changes in climate and changes in land use. The main cause of this is large-scale commercial agriculture. So let's take an example. Cattle ranching and soybean and palm oil cultivation accounted for 40% of tropical deforestation between 2000 and 2010, 40%. An indirect effect of industrial agriculture, like cattle ranching, is the clearing of massive amounts of land for animal feed crops. Just the food that the animals are going to eat, just disconnected from everything else that's happening with the animals. So what I've linked here is the UN's plan for climate changes in the agriculture and food sector. And the UN estimates that changes just in this one sector of the 6 that they analyze, changes in this agricultural sector would reduce global emissions by 7 of the needed 30 gigatons annually to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So definitely check out this link at home later. When we talk about deforestation, though, I'm not just talking about the loss of trees, but also the animals and the fungi that maintain forest biodiversity and ecosystem functions. Deforestation and this loss of biodiversity means high extinction rates of animals. So in the last 100 years, we are aware of 543 known species that have gone extinct. But researchers suggest that normally, without human intervention, this number of species lost would have taken 10,000 years. But let's pause for a second. So how is degradation and loss of biodiversity related to disease? Let's look at the example of Lyme disease. Lyme disease bacteria are transmitted to humans by ticks that are infected with the bacteria. And our human risk of getting Lyme disease increased drastically with the extinction of passenger pigeons. Passenger pigeons somehow made us more likely to get Lyme disease. How did this possibly happen? Passenger pigeons went extinct in 1914. There used to be billions of passenger pigeons. They were extremely abundant. And they ate seeds. So many seeds that they limited the population growth of other seed-eating creatures. After the extinction of these pigeons, the white-footed mouse population exploded. Not because passenger pigeons ate mice, but because they both ate seeds. And so the risk to human health increased because white-footed mice are the reservoir host for Lyme disease. They bring this disease to humans. So the lesson here is that high biodiversity and stable ecosystems have a protective function. With high biodiversity, pathogens can reside undetected within a reservoir host for centuries without incidence of zoonosis. Here's a second zoonosis example that considers land clearing practices and ocean warming. A 2023 peer-reviewed paper in the journal Nature studied Hendra virus spillovers from fruit bats to horses to people in Australia. So 7 people around the world have ever caught the Hendra virus, and of those 7 people, 4 of them died from it. The authors found that anthropogenic climate activities have increased the frequency of this Hendra virus spillover to humans. How did this happen? The first is by increasing bats' viral shedding through climate-induced food shortages. So what do Australian fruit bats eat? This won't be on the test. The answer is, yeah, they eat eucalyptus tree nectar. As ocean temperatures rise, fewer eucalyptus trees flower, so they have less nectar. The bats start eating different inferior food, and they start building inferior houses, what are called roosts. And this weakens them overall and causes them to excrete more pathogens, so they're more contagious. Second, these human activities increase the contact between bats and horses. Since 1996, humans have cleared 1/3 of bats' winter habitat. So bats now live closer to humans. So bats now come into farms to feed on the fruit trees there. And what else is on farms? Horses are on farms. And so horses pass it to humans once they get it from bats. Now, the really good news for us is that research shows if we were to restore the bat habitat, they would return to that habitat and incidence of zoonosis would decrease. So our risk would reduce. The bigger picture here is that the steps we take to reduce the climate crisis can also reduce zoonotic incidents that can lead to pandemics. I want to pause for a second. So early on in the COVID pandemic, anti-Asian racism really arose prominently in public discourse. And there was an increase in discrimination, and there was an increase in hate crimes in Canada and other countries. And there was a lot of talk about wet markets in Wuhan, China, as the source of transmission between animals and humans. So we know wet markets involve the sale of live animals. And in 2022, Warabi and colleagues in Science demonstrated that a Wuhan market was the early pandemic epicenter, and they used spatial data to show this. So certainly, serious review and revision of live animal handling practices is absolutely essential. But what I am trying to argue today is that actually we are all implicated in creating conditions where emerging diseases are likely to jump from animals to humans because of anthropogenic climate change. So blaming one culture, one community, one practice is not only ethnocentric, and in this case it was done in ways that were really racist, but it's also not effective in preventing us from future pandemic risks.